Thank you. So tonight is on Wednesday, November 6th. Going to call the Board of Directors Finance Advisory Committee to order at 6 p.m. That's great. We're on time tonight. Before we do review agenda, and I don't think we will. I know there's been last 24 hours has been chaotic in the world. Let's just keep that at bay. Let's not bring that in here if possible. And just have a meeting about the school and the school district and finances. I do see a few people not here yet, so maybe they'll join us, but we still have a quorum because we have technically 10, without Cat's 9, and we have 7 here. So we have a quorum at this point. So we'll continue going forward. First thing is review agenda for any additions or deletions. And like last time, I have 2 topics and I want to add one if anybody wants to take minutes. We'll discuss that later. And then it's kind of an open agenda item for people to, we've had a few meetings and have an open agenda item towards the end about feedback from you guys in general. So anything else? Okay. Minutes, last meeting, we didn't have the minutes in the packet, so we have 2 weeks of minutes, or 2 meetings worth of minutes, 9/26 and 10/16. Again, these are just kind of high level overviews. I think the first one I did a lot more in depth and like what we talked about, because there's very specific things we talked about. This last one was a lot of education, so I just did high level, comments about what happened and what was presented. And so I'll give it a couple minutes for you to review and see if there's any concerns with those. Does anybody want to make a motion to approve?
I move that the Finance Committee approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
Okay. Any discussions or? Okay, call for a vote. Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Any nays?
Yeah, what?
Any nays?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, any nays? No. Because we're doing this on the board as well, I'm gonna do it here. So let's go through and confirm a name and your response. We'll start over there with Michelle. So
Michelle Morrison, aye.
Gay Gertz, aye.
Jared Isaacson, aye. I'm assuming we're approving the meeting. Yeah. Derek Duff, aye.
Saul Allen, aye.
Jeremy Hayden, aye.
Mark Ankeny, aye.
Philip Van Cleve, aye.
Okay, and I think at this point we're missing just Claire. Okay, I thought we had some else. Okay. Okay, so we'll move it to Gail. I see you're online. Can you hear us loud and clear?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you. So I think you're the majority of the next part where you're going to review a few items with us. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, I'm going to attempt to share. Hopefully. Okay, looks like. So can you see the screen?
We can, but super tiny. Can
Okay.
we zoom in?
I will change this to. Is that better?
It's getting better.
It's getting better. Oh boy, because it's ginormous on my screen.
Well, I think it's because you have a super wide screen. That's probably, at least does this match what we have printed at all?
Yes.
Okay, so if you can just kind of help walk us through while you're talking, I
Correct.
think we should be able to monitor or manage it from
Okay.
our side.
So this is for the 6/30/23/24 year end. And what this shows here is our budget for 23/24. This is revenue. The first sheet is revenue. What we actually received.
Well, hold on, Galen, 1 second, because I think what we got printed was a little out of order. We just got to get to the right page.
I apologize. I
Sheet
had
number 4.
real trouble getting, I could not get some things to actually
Thank you, Jared.
go to PDF. So I had to have
No.
my assistant help me with this.
No worries. We found the two. I think you're going to go over revenue and expenditures, right? They're similar looks, just one's longer than the other.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah. So there's going to be these 2 pages we're going to be reviewing. I'm holding up. Okay, I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay. So the first column is the 23/24 budget for revenue. The second column is our actual revenue that we received, whether we were over or under budget. And then that it shows you a comparison to what budget was for 22/23. That's not necessarily what we actually received for 22/23, but what the budget was. And that actual at the and then what we actually received in 22/23. Excuse me. So that's for comparison's sake. So you can see what we had budgeted for, what we received, what we budgeted for the prior year, and what we received the prior year. So for revenue, the top section is everything that's part of the state school fund. So it's current year, prior year, and property taxes and any payments in lieu of property taxes are the first 3 items. We have the county school fund. And then our regular state school fund support, followed by the common school fund. Those are the pieces that we get. As you can see, the biggest outliers actually was the actual state school fund, the 3101, which we knew was going to be less, first of all, because of a prior year adjustment, the May adjustment from the year before for the 22/23 school year, and the fact that we received $20 million in basically in property taxes, but we had estimated a lot, incorrectly. And so we received less state school fund. So we budgeted for 53.8 million, we received 49 million. As we, I hope it's not doing this on your screen. It's doing some weird things on my screen.
It is a little bit, but I
I'm
think
going to move to another sheet and then come back. There we go.
there we go.
So then you can see basically all of the other local sources of revenue and where they differed from what we had budgeted. The biggest here being the interest on earnings, or earnings on investments, the interest on our investments. Part of that is because in the prior years we haven't received as much. And the other piece was because we hadn't been allocating it correctly across the different funds. So we did a reallocation across all funds as with their balances. And we had a higher amount of earnings for this last year due to the general fund. The next, excuse me, biggest piece was that what we had budgeted for recovery of prior year expenditures was about 300,000, and we received about 114. We budgeted for fees charged to grants, but as I explained in our prior meeting, we have not charged an indirect rate, nor will we be able to this year, but we have not charged an indirect rate to grants to bring that into the general fund. What the flip of that is that we're able to spend more out of the grant in direct services in the grant and not offset that towards the general fund. So, and then the last piece that I'm gonna show as a rather large difference is that 3299, it says other state grants. That is our high cost disability grant with the state. We haven't budgeted for it as separate from the state school fund, but it really is separate from the state school fund. It is a different object, and we received $1 million, about 900,000 and change was from the 23-24 year, and 100-ish thousand was an adjustment through the May state school fund prior year adjustment for the prior year high cost disability. So what and then beginning fund balance and interfund transfers are the next section. So as you can see, we budgeted for $65 million of revenue. We received 60.9. As you look down, the next line is estimated requirements. That comes from that general fund expenditure tab. So and it says estimated ending fund balance, but that is our actual ending fund balance for the year for 23-24. As of today, when we had our exit interview with our auditors, there will be no adjustment to that ending fund balance. So the negative 1.2 million is our ending fund balance for the 23-24 school year.
So that means it's running at a deficit when you say it's negative.
Correct. We spent more than we had in revenue. So are there any questions on this particular, on the revenue section? Excuse me.
Galen, this is Michelle.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if you were surprised by any of this information. I mean, is this pretty much what you thought it was as you were assembling the financial report?
As we put everything together, I really thought we'd be a little bit more negative. Where we were able to decrease the negative was first of all in the interest allocation, because it had been done, it was really not being done correctly, and we walked through it all with the auditors, and they completely agreed with our allocation methodology. There had been a transfer into the PERS UAL from the general fund to the LGIP that was sitting there that really was general fund money that never should have been put in there. It was accumulating interest there and never coming back to the general fund. So we got a lot of that cleaned up. We spent a lot of time going through all of those accounts. The other piece is we were able to move a few expenditures from general fund into grants as we looked at what was available in ESSER to clean up the last of our ESSER claiming. And so we were able to move about $200,000 worth of expenditures from the general fund into grants. So that brought us down from about, I was thinking we were going to end the year somewhere between 1.7 and 2 million in the negative, and we ended at 1.2.
Thank you.
Certainly. I do, Michelle, to answer the other thing is that it's been interesting looking at how things have been budgeted in the prior years and in the current year, even for, like I say, for high cost disability, for a few other things. There's been some sort of lumping. And then when things come in, they're not necessarily also separated out. So it's difficult to see where things really have been. But we're trying to make sure that we show those things much more transparently now.
Galen, this is Jared.
Yes.
Was there an ending fund balance for the year ended June 30, 2023?
Yes, and that if you look down at the bottom under this 5,400 line 47, I don't know if it shows the line.
Okay, I see it there.
That was 7.7.
Okay.
They had originally estimated in the budget that it would be 8.5. 7.7 is a really generous ending fund balance for a district this size.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that we pretty much blew through all, I mean, not pretty much,
You did.
used all of it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So the next page that you have is the general fund expenditures. And the first way we're going to show it, well, actually the only way we're going to show it for this year is by function. So that you can see instruction and support services and where we were either over or under our budget. Now, we did do a budget appropriation transfer during the year, but so we're not over in instruction. We did end the year slightly over in support services from the actual final budget, but not the total amount that's showing at the bottom. And I'll get to that in the appropriations tab. So this includes all expenditures. So it's by function. So where we spent the money, we spent it on elementary, middle, etc. As you look through the instruction functions, but it doesn't tell you exactly how it was spent as far as on salaries or associated payroll costs, etc. And it gives you an idea of the increase from year to year. So in elementary, we spent just shy, and I mean very just shy of 13 million. And the year before we had spent 12.3. So we increased in elementary by $700,000 in the 23-24 school year. Likewise, we did increase at middle school, but not by nearly as much, nor did we increase as much in high school programs.
Galen, can you give a quick like definition what 1122 is, the middle junior high school extracurricular, what 1131 is, high school programs, or 1132 high school extracurricular, what those may entail?
Yes, certainly. Just one moment. I have to. So middle school and high school extracurricular would include any athletics or activities that are not specifically instructional, but are meant to supplement students in their day or in their activities. So it would include clubs that are at the high school. It would include things that are not donated monies or fundraised monies, which would be handled in our ASB accounts or student body accounts. But these are actual activities that the district pays for, that we should pay for as supplementary activities for our students. So again, it would be anything with athletics and activities that the students would be engaging in. We don't have much of that at all at the elementary level because they don't tend to have any kind of clubs or athletics. So it's really only at the middle and the high school level.
Okay, thank you. And is that the same thing for the high school programs? That's a 6 million, or is that a different?
No, the high school programs are the same as middle, junior high programs. That's anything. They don't say elementary programs, but it's the same thing. It's regular instruction that is general
see. Okay.
instruction that's happening at either the elementary, the middle, or the high schools.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Then we have, obviously, we have talented and gifted. We have our the 1220s through the 1250s are our special education programs. And if you notice, we did spend a significant spent significantly more on those in the 1250, the less restrictive programs for students with disabilities. Our budget was 5.8, which was about what we had spent the year before, and we spent 6.7. So in that particular area of special education, we spent $900,000 more than budgeted. And you should know this is after we have done some of the movement to keep our maintenance of effort low. So it even with that, we were spending considerably more on special ed than we budgeted.
Yep. And Gail, and this is Derek. I have a question to that. As a percentage of student body, did we have any meaningful change there, or is this just a matter of, I know that there's some challenges regarding employment, especially with highly specialized skills associated with SPED. Was it more the latter, or did we have a meaningful shift in student change?
We didn't have a meaningful shift in student population. So our student population did not increase substantially. What we saw actually was what you're saying. We could not hire people, and we had to hire them through contracted services. And that is considerably more expensive. It's for certain of the activities that we have to hire, or certain of the specialties that we have to hire for. We are still having to do some of that this year, but considerably less. We were able to hire more of our specialists, but we still have, and the board will see, we still have a couple of positions that we haven't been able to hire internally for, a portion of an SLP and a portion of a psych position, psychologist position, and those we've had to go externally for. But in prior years, they did a lot of external hires for EAs for SPED because they couldn't hire them internally. That has changed. So we're able now to not have to contract out for those positions.
Thank you.
So not a lot of other difference in between actual expenditures and budget within instruction there. But as we come down into the support services, you can see a few other places where we were substantially over budget. And the one that clearly stands out the most is the vehicle operations, so our transportation services. This looked at first as if we were spending considerably outside of our contract, but the budget was not budgeted for the amount of the contract. So the amount of the contract was 5.1 and change. And they budgeted for 4.1. And so that, and I don't know what the background was for that, other than the year before, they had only spent 3.4. But remember that for a while, we weren't transporting children as much as we are back doing that now again. So COVID kind of got us out of transporting kids for a while. And I don't know if this just caught them by surprise, but
So there
now
was, Galen, just for the history, because of the community, there was a change in transportation contractors. It wasn't going well, so they switched back to their former contractor. I mean, they went through a process, obviously, to
Okay.
do that, but so it went
That's
through an
good.
RFP process. We awarded to a new company. The parents were not had concerns, and so that contract was ended, and the former company came back, and it was the negotiation of the company coming back is when I think the budget was created based on old information, and then when they
Gotcha.
created the new contract, they didn't update.
And we have now budgeted for the amount of or very close to the amount of the contract for the 24-25 school year. So that's where expenditures were. And if you look, we spent considerably, we spent 62 million, budget was 65. The problem was revenue didn't come in to equal the budget, and expenditures, even though they were under budget, were more than the revenue that we had. Which is why we wound up with a $1.2 million negative ending fund balance.
And just another question.
Mhm.
Board of Education Services, that's primarily tied up with litigation, correct? That category?
I would say a lot of it is. It's also the other things that happen in the board are paying for our Zoom meetings, paying for other services that we have to run board meetings, that there are more and more of those as the years go on. Making sure that all of our policies are up to date and that we review them with the ESD, it's our legal counsel through the ESD, and a lot of that does not happen necessarily through resolution dollars, but outside of that. So yes, that's what happens there.
Gotcha. And then the other question I had, just because there was no allocation of actual dollars towards it, there's a 2119 other attendance and social work. What would fall under that category?
Just a moment. Let me pull up my trusty P-band, because in my brain I can't remember everything. And Claire and Michelle, if that's front and center on your
Well, I don't know if the district has social workers or not, but yeah.
Yeah, and we do have some social workers. So it's attendance and social work services other than those described above. So my guess is that is social work contractors that we had. Because several of those are contracted out or were contracted out last year.
Thank you.
Galen, this is Mark Ankeny. I just want to say thank you for all your great work and congratulations on being able to get your audit completed today. And
well, mostly.
Well, okay, we'll have to have it mostly completed and have it a truer picture of how we ended up that year and how we can go forward. Thank you.
It was a real team effort, let me tell you. So you should have another sheet that shows the appropriations. And if you notice, the appropriations are a little different than what it shows for the general fund than what it shows on the expenditure tab. And that's because the expenditure tab is pulling the adopted, not the what's called the final budget, which is the adopted plus any supplemental budgets that happened during the year. And the supplemental budgets that we had that happened during the year moved our appropriations from out of contingency and into support services. And our auditors, we discussed it with our auditors today, and we still wound up being $281,547 over appropriations for support services. That is it's noted in our audit and it noted to the state. There are no fiscal repercussions. They ask that we look and make sure that we don't do it again. So we will be watching our appropriation levels this year, and we will definitely need to do some appropriations transfers this year, especially within some of the other funds. But all of the other funds were fine. It was just the general fund that was slightly off.
So to summarize, an appropriation is where the board has given permission to spend up to a certain level. And so the district administration spent 281,000 more than they had permission from the board to spend. So that's why it's written up in the audit and it's reported out. So, and certainly it's something being proactive as you would be forecasting and notice that that's headed that way. And then you would come to the board and say, here's the costs that have increased. And so we need to do an appropriation transfer and then get the permission to spend before it's spent.
And usually at the beginning of the year, it's not as big a deal because you don't necessarily know that you're going to spend and you have plenty of room. But as you move through the year, you need to make sure that you're watching that. And this format plus one other sheet will be what's going to be coming to the board, to you first to look at, and then to the board for on a monthly basis, showing where we are as far as appropriation levels are concerned and where we are as far as functionally and by object compared to our revenue. So the last sheet that we have in this file is looking at the state school fund from a few different touch points. As we talked about last time, there may be 10 or more. Sometimes there's only 6 or 7 iterations of the state school fund that are sent out by ODE. We took 4 as touch points here to show you what the original was on 6/26 of 23, that all of our original state school fund, initial state school fund disbursements were based off of. And then as we got a new one in 12 of 23, another one in March of 23, and then our final one in May, of 24. And it shows you how some things were changed. One of the things that was changed was saying, oh, we had considerably underestimated our property taxes. They did a big swing and overestimated them, but it came a little late. And then they changed the transportation piece for our transportation grant. The teacher averages come from the state. We generate the information for our district to send to the state, and then they compare it to the state averages. And you can see the ADMW did change slightly through the year. But the other thing that changes every time when the state runs the state school fund is that funding ratio. So you can see the funding ratio change, and then what we actually wind up receiving from the state in the total formula revenue, the state school fund grant that we get.
I have a quick question, Gail and
Yes.
Jeremy. So you're saying these data points come from the state?
Yes. But
And is it,
we
or is
we
it
put some
something
of the
like we submit a
information in.
little bit and then they make adjustments on their next report out?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not
Because-
trying to go back too much in history. So we're
Right.
saying we were notified as of March 28th that we were going to get less funds.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We actually changed the property tax number. So the district updated that number with the state.
Right.
Which lowered our funding coming in.
Mhm.
We told them we were gonna get 22.
Sure, I get
Yeah.
that, but what I'm saying is on this, and I'm not trying to rehash,
Right. No.
but we were not advised of this back in March, and we did not get notified until we had a problem until May. So they're saying if we did something and then if there was report on March 28th, then at that point, we did not, as a board, get notified until May until there's issues.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So this is
So-
the larger board issue that we had to go through.
So this is a great way that Galen has set up the analysis
Okay.
here. And this is something that we should be, so that you could ask for this kind of reporting from your financial leadership.
Mhm.
And I want to ask, this $3 million is what you're expecting approximately?
Approximately,
change.
it'll be somewhere between 2.7 to 3 million. Because
In May,
right,
in
because I
May of
don't,
25,
yes, in May of
for the
25.
final
because-
payment for 23, 24.
Correct, because
So
we
in-
don't know, this is a guess as to what the final funding factor will change. This is using the 489,401 as our final number, and I know it changed a little. So for our ADMW, but we want to wait. So I did this off of some number that I showed you last time.
Mhm.
That came closer to 2.8, almost 2.9. So this is just keeping everything flat. And the one that I had done earlier is taking into account some numbers that I know have already changed.
So in reality, we spent 1.2 million more than we budgeted of what we received in revenue in 23, 24. But in a year later, we're going to recoup, say, 2.7 million. So we would actually come out on the good of 1.5 million plus in terms of the final 23, 24 school year. And of course, that money will help for 24, 25 because it'll roll into that
Right.
account at some point.
And I'll show you how that is showing up in the projections that I'm going to show next.
Well, the other thing that's great about this is that this estimate sheet, and you just captured, 4 snapshots here, is that the board, and I guess we will see it, as you said, we'll see it as we go through this year for 24, 25,
Yes,
and we'll be able to watch it more closely and not make mistakes like was made in the previous year around property tax estimate revenue, for example, or allocations that haven't been approved.
correct.
It's been
And I did sort of look back to see what kinds of reports had been given to the board, and this is not the kind of report that was given before. It was something directly out of the system, which is fine, but it doesn't allow you to make some of these comparisons because it's not showing either multiple dates or years and comparison of spending up to this point. What would you expect to see spent by this point? Which is something I haven't had a chance to pull. I've just looked at spending overall for the year, not what would I expect to see at this point versus at this point last year or at this point 2 years ago. But that's the next iteration of what I will bring forward, so that we have a better idea of projecting out. But I'll kind of give you an idea of what that is when I share the next one. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this. And.
Are we kind of concluding the 23 or the June
Yes,
23?
yes. So if there's more, if there are other questions.
So go ahead. So I have just a couple general questions. So if and we knew we were going to have, a shortfall for this, the final numbers for the last year. And I know, and I'm not saying we have to go into the cash balance because I know we couldn't get a loan as a board or the district because we still had good cash flow, I guess is the right term. Right. And so just higher level, like how does now that we're going to be submitted in an audit and finalize and say we are officially negative 1.23 million last year as a deficit, how does that change our status in any way? And maybe not from a credit rating, but any other, like how does that impact a school district in general?
Well, as you said, it definitely impacted our credit rating.
Yes. So
our bond rating and credit rating. And to the point where, as we talk a little bit later about the Dundee property, it's definitely had an impact there. But it's appearances are very important, and the fact that we ended the year in a negative does not look good amongst other districts. I will tell you that, as it has definitely had an impact on us being able to find another person to take over as the director of finance, because they know that there are problems here, right? I don't know, Claire, if you have other
So
insight
one of
that
the,
you'd like to share.
some of the things I think of is when you run into a deficit in one year, that means you have to make it up in the next year, and that means less programs and less services in the next year, right?
Mhm.
So luckily, because of the underfunded state school fund because of what we submitted, I mean, it's our own, we did it to ourselves, so I don't want to, say it's because of anything else, but because of that, we're now going to be able to make up that deficit rather than having to make further cuts in this year. So by the end of the year, it kind of even out, and it will even go a little bit farther and help us then have a positive fund balance, which is something that we would want to maintain on a regular basis. We have a policy that says
Right.
what it should be. So.
Okay.
And I will say that the cuts are extremely deep this year, and they will have to be deep again next year because we have to make up for the furlough days. But hopefully with the state school fund or the state understanding that we have been underfunded for our current service level, that we may have a little bit of a jump start on the next biennium, and it may not be quite as bad as we might have originally thought.
So when you get agreement for furlough days, it only is a 1 year's reduction, right? So we're still at that service level that's higher, that then in the next year, we still don't have the money to pay for it. So we have to make further reductions. But so I just want to kind of just say that in another way. And but the 11.3 billion funding level that the governor has announced, that is the current service level, is much higher than we've had in growth than in previous biennia. So December 1, her budget will come out, and that will help us be able to make a plan then for the budget the following year. And of course, then we wait for the co-chairs. They put out a budget in the spring, and then they have a May forecast, and that's usually when they finalize. So, but we're long into our budget process before that, because we have to have the budget, done by June. So we'll have to make decisions even before the legislature is done with their process.
Okay. On the level of bonds, and that can maybe come later, or I know there's been, the idea has come up is, do we look at a potential levy? Like I know Sherwood did one, right? And I'm not saying we do. Does this, and maybe this is the domino effect. So this does in fact our bond rating or credit rating, et cetera. So then that would maybe impact a potential levy. And then again, I'm not saying I'm not promoting a levy. I'm just asking just a question to understand. Would that impact that too?
The levy is not a selling of bonds. It's
Okay.
taxing of our constituency.
Okay.
So our property tax holders. And so it doesn't affect that.
Okay.
And it actually, having a local option levy can actually help your bond rating because you have more local support for your district.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
The challenge for selling a levy to a constituent is that if you're not managing your finances well, people are often not as excited about trying to add more to it, which will be the challenge if you go down that road.
Oh yeah, I totally get that side. I wasn't even going down that path. I was just trying to understand how this all works together. Yeah. So
Yeah, I was just curious. I was looking back at the state school fund grant page that we looked at last meeting. And the numbers aren't the same between the state school fund grant from 6/26/23 as they were for the budgeted numbers. The state school fund page, that worksheet showed property taxes at 18,800,000. And then we were budgeted for 19,980.
Right. So here's something that I do want to explain. A lot of people get hung up on having to have what's sitting in the state school fund as your estimate for your local revenue as equaling what you've got in your budget for your local revenue. They may not be the same. And there's a couple of reasons. You may have your budgeting at a different time than when you're sending in that original estimate of membership and revenue to the state. And you have sort of competing interests in what you're putting in your budget versus what you're putting in the state school fund. In the state school fund, being conservative, you actually want to not go too low. You don't want to underestimate at all your property taxes. You may want to give yourself a cushion of, let's say, $100,000 or $200,000 when you're sending it into the state, so that you know you're not going to be in a position of being showing too little property tax revenue and having to give state school fund money back. On your budget, in your budget, you want to be conservative in the concept of the way we all think of conservative. You want to be a little bit under, right? So that you're not spending more money than you're ever really going to get.
So based on what I'm saying, then we did the wrong thing both ways.
Yes.
Well,
or maybe yes.
So, yeah. So so think about the timing. In January, we have to give an estimate for the next year. We actually collect to the ODE. We actually collect the taxes in November and December. Usually by the end of December, we have a pretty good idea of what our property tax collections will be for the year. Okay. And then, so by the time you're hitting, the spring, March, in the spring, you actually know your collections, where a year before you were estimating based on what prior year's experience was, right? So just remember that all these numbers come in at different times and the information changes over a 2-year period. Okay. And so I would expect them to change. Okay.
And the other thing is that they don't have to tie directly. It's where you're going to want to tie more closely, if you can, is in your state school, what you're actually estimating for what that state school fund revenue is going to be. But again, I would say when you're budgeting for revenue, and expenditure. Well, for revenue, you want to say, you don't want to overestimate what your revenue is going to be for your budget. You also don't want to underestimate your expenditures. That's what being conservative when you're budgeting is. But when you're looking at what you're sending to the state, it's a little bit different. And so, I mean, I've rarely seen them match exactly.
Thank you. I guess I'm still just trying to get at, like, we talked about how we had spent $1 million more than we had budgeted for, but I'm still trying to figure out how that matches up. Our revenues were 4 million less.
Correct.
Part of that was the 2.5 million. Is that right?
It's two parts. You had the under budgeting of property taxes, and then we had the adjustment for the 2022, 2023.
Yeah, so but there's the 4 million under on the revenue.
Yes.
There is the overspending, but I think that it feels like we're losing that $7 million of ending fund balance that we had transferred to get to that one. And I'm just still trying to wrap my head around how all of those pieces get in, because hearing $1 million over sounds a lot different than what we had planned on saving 7 million in an ending fund balance, and we actually ended up with one.
So the 7 million is what we started at the year. It wasn't what we projected to end the year with.
It wasn't budgeted.
It is in the budget as what we started the year with fund
Yeah.
balance, but the budget was built to spend that down during the year,
But not all of it.
but not the whole thing, not as much as we did. Yeah.
It was
Okay.
budgeted to spend down, I would say not quite half, because they were looking to have a contingency and an unappropriated ending fund balance at the end of the year. And they ended the year with neither of those.
I think the way I would have to look at it to probably tell the story that's easier to understand is having a column that's budget and a column that's actual, and saying this is what the beginning fund balance budget versus actual was. This is how much you budgeted for revenue and how much you actually received. And this is what you spent. And so then you could follow it through in those two separate columns. Right now, you're trying to put those overlapping, and I think that's what's confusing. Okay.
Okay. I mean, I guess I'm still confused that I look at the budget and I look at what was budgeted for unappropriated ending fund balance of 2.83 plus the contingency at 1.13. Okay, so that's 4 million instead of the 7.7.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we were
Yes.
looking at a $4 million ending fund balance. Okay, that's where I got confused. Thank you.
And I think, Saul, what was also confusing probably was when the budget was put together, there was an original estimation of having another beginning fund balance for this year, for the 24-25 year, when all the budgeting was happening, of another about $8 million. So they were saying as if we kept all of it, but we didn't. So I think that might have been another piece that was kind of in the back of your head. Okay, so if you're ready, I will go and share this year where we are, and this is through, sorry, I want to be sure I'm doing the same one, and I want to make sure I need to make it much bigger. So we're starting again with our revenue page. And as you can see, we budgeted a lot less this year for overall for our revenues. Last year was 65 million, and this year our total is 56.5 million. And again, the bulk of what we receive is in state school fund formula. We have not received, again, we have the 24-25 budget column followed by our actual year-to-date revenue. And the only revenue that we have basically that we have received so far is our regular state school fund payments. We, as you would expect, we've received very little. This is through 9/30, so it's through September 30. We've received very little in terms of property taxes. We will start seeing those this next week. We'll start getting our first tax turnovers. And by the end of November, beginning of December, we'll have, as Claire said, a much better idea of where we'll be as far as our total tax receipts, because we can look at what we've received in prior years up through that first few payments, and then extrapolate out what the rest of the year will look like. And at that point, when we do our estimate of membership and revenue with the state, we can adjust our property taxes as we have them at the state, and that will probably happen just like I explained last meeting. But there's not a whole lot going on here as far as what we've actually received. When I look at the projections of what I think we're going to get, I'm holding the current year property taxes as they've been budgeted because I really don't have any idea yet what they will come in at. But what I'm looking at, if you look at that total estimated column, you'll see that I have increased the total state school fund revenue by $1.5 million. That is due to the increase that I believe we're going to see in May, and not yet knowing what our property tax is going to come in at. I'm not making a full adjustment for what I think the May payment will be.
So you're talking about the May payment for 23-24?
For 23-24, correct.
Okay.
The other piece is that when everything has been budgeted in the past, high cost disability has been lumped in with that state school fund in 3101. I have now moved that down. It was not budgeted for in the 3200s, and I have now moved it down to show it as coming, as I'm expecting at least 800,000. Again, I'm not going to be too generous. We received a little over 9 last year, but high cost disability can be very volatile across the state. So I've put $800,000 down in the 3299 object. So if you put those two together, I have accounted for about 2.3 of the total 3 that I believe that we will get. Hopefully that makes sense of what I've done there. The other things that I've done as I'm looking to project out is services provided to other districts. We budgeted $105,000 in prior years. Now, last year we did not actually bill for it, but in prior years we've shared a couple of employees in our special ed department with other districts. So we owned the employee, and we used them, let's say 60% of the time, and the other district used them 40% of the time. We billed the other district and they paid us. And so the revenue comes in under that services provided to other districts. We had budgeted for $105,000 there. I do not believe we will get any of that. We did not receive any of it last year. I don't have any reason to think that it'll come in this year. I have bumped up what I'm expecting in.
Caitlin?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Sorry. This Jared, is that because that is not happening? Like we're not sharing staff?
We are not sharing that same staff person anymore.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Right. And there's nothing on the there's nothing out there right now for us to share. So I'm assuming that that won't happen. When I look at recovery of prior year expenditures, we've already received a payment from, as you could, it's a basically a reimbursement for some insurance money that came in after the fact. So it came in after September. So it's not showing here, but I know that it's here. And so I believe that we will have probably closer to $150,000 worth of recovery of prior year expenditures. So that makes up basically that 100,000 that we're not going to see in services provided to other districts. The next one down is fees charged to grants. We do not have an indirect rate. We will not be charging anything to grants this year, but are looking to do that next year. I fully expect that we will see the 1.8 from the ESD. And then the 800,000 for high cost disability. And if you notice, we didn't budget for, we budgeted for a 0 beginning fund balance. And we have a negative beginning fund balance. So that eats up some of our other revenue. But again, we will be bringing in that May adjustment, which will cover that piece. So as we look right now, I'm estimating that we will actually have more revenue at the end of the year than what we budgeted for. To the tune of 900.
That's really good
900,000.
news. And I wanted to say that when I think about this, it's a little bit like, you know, trying to get your picture in focus, the camera going
Yes.
forward. And the next focus point sounds to me like would be then at the end of, near the end of December or January would be better. And I'm asking that partly about, as we think about when our next meeting is, you know, what's the best kind of picture that we could get in terms of either mid-December, or would it be better to do it mid-January to get a good picture?
Yeah, I would say mid-January, just because
No, I'd say so.
the timing on things and having to get things to the state.
Yeah.
And trying to put all of that together. We will have all of that together by then, because we have to get it, the bulk of it, to the state. We used to have it, and Claire and Michelle will remember this, we used to have it in by like December 10th. And now they've given us to the first week of January, which is really nice.
So the one other piece though that would be nice to look at is our ADMW as of December 31st. And that
Yeah.
probably won't be ready until later in January.
Right.
Yeah, and so we might want to consider like an early February meeting, and that way we can have a really clear picture of through December 31 what things are looking at, like, and then that will help us guide us as we're building for our budget for the next year.
Which that was one of my a question I just had now is, when is it typically when is the proposed budget delivered to the budget committee typically?
I believe here it's April.
April.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
But budget work is already starting. So, you know, as we look at what our needs are going to be next year, all of those pieces.
Yeah, I think we'll be adjusting our budget schedule going forward, annually. So a quick question for you, Gail. Is that the estimated adjustment that we notated on the previous packet of 2.73, is that actually showing on this current 24-25 revenue, or no?
You mean the what we're expecting for that May payment?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, it is in there. Okay.
Yeah, it is there.
Okay.
It's kind of split, because I had to pull the 800,000 out for from up above, that where it had been put instead of being put down at high cost disability. So, but there is an adjustment up above. It's just not the entire adjustment because I don't know yet where those property taxes are going to come in at. So I don't want to overestimate what we'll get.
Makes sense. And one just minor comment. So as we present this to the board next week, I don't know. Yeah, I know you had printing issues, but this is the title on these are still showing 23, 24 in the title.
Okay.
So,
Thank you
and if we
very
can maybe
much.
then actually tag, like maybe add a line saying revenue and expenditures, you know, as a header somewhere, that'd be great.
Yeah, yes, I'm very happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out because I couldn't get them to print here at home.
No, oh, I get it. And I know you had that issue. So just,
But
something
I
to
will be,
prepare us
I'll
for
be in
next-
the office next week too, so I will be
Awesome.
I'll be able to pull those.
Awesome. Thank you.
So as you look down below, it says less estimated requirements. So those estimated requirements again are coming from that general fund expenditure by function tab, which we will look at next. So and I'm going high on expenditures. I will tell you that right now because I don't want to be caught not prepared. But with that, we still should have, and so I guess what I'm couching that as is, I believe we will definitely have a positive ending fund balance, but it may be anywhere between the 922 thousand that I'm showing here, or it could be higher if we can keep expenditures down. But I don't want to estimate too low on what I think we can save in expenditures, especially if we have when I know that we're under budgeted by about 300,000 in electrical and a few other places. So I want to be sure that we're covered.
So one thing I want to point out is in the budget the first column, the 2024-25 budget column. If you remember, we had just a couple of weeks to balance the budget with the new understanding of our financial standing at that point. So we just took across the board, not we, but staff took across the board in the budget committee and the board approved and adopted it, understanding that our actuals were going to vary quite differently throughout the budget because we just went through because we didn't know what was going to be reduced. And so just understand there's going to be a lot of variance here, but what's important is the totals are at the bottom are matching up and lining up. And forgive the budget was what we had to do in order to meet that June 30th deadline.
And there will be, you'll see some places on the general fund expenditure page where there's very little budget given and we've already expended chunk there, but other places where I don't think we're going to spend it. And so it already is, you can see some of the skewed pieces now because, and I'll give you just an example. A pretty simple example was under the printing services. So printing function 2574. Printing, publishing, and duplicating services. It's fairly far down on the support services piece. The budget was $1,000. We've already spent 38,000. Last year, the budget was 73,500 and they spent 92. I'm sure it was a place, it was easy to pull that out. And so it just was an easy spot to pull something. But we're going to spend there anyway, because we need to spend some of those dollars. But there may be other places that will not quite expend that balance. I just don't know yet where some of those will be. And this is a lot because this shows a lot of all the different functions. what I've done is I've said, okay, here at the far right column, it's what percentage of budget in the prior year was spent. So it's taking that 6/30/24 actual year to date and comparing it to the 23/24 budget. And that gives us, so on that very first line, elementary programs, we spent 95.35% of the budget. Currently, we are committed. So our actual expenditures plus our projections are looking at 101.3. We knew we would be over in salary. And the biggest expenditures in our those top three functions, the 1111, 1121, and 1131, is salary. So I'm not overly surprised that we're high there. But if we weren't currently looking to estimate us to be out at about what we spent last year, I plugged it in so that it forced it to go up to that percentage. Or close to that percentage. And one thing I do want you to know is that I've had a discussion with Dave, and we are looking to talk with each of the schools and the departments about a level of savings that each will need to find in their current year budget, so that we can have some other savings, because we know that we are over in a few areas. So I don't want to explain, necessarily the whole this entire sheet, but if you have questions or anything jumps out at you, please.
Yeah, what is the PY percent of budget spent at the end there?
That's the prior year percentage of budget spent.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah.
And this is just validation. I'm reading this correctly. The kind of somewhere in the middle says percent committed.
Correct.
That column is also part of what's the total estimated for that compared to what the budget
Correct.
was.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm not saying we have to go over this now. I think this is going to be a topic we need to. Well, the board is going to like to know. Do you know? Is there an easy way to break down on why we've already spent $750,000 this year for Board of Education? I'm not asking you to answer it now. I'm just wondering if maybe that might be something that you can provide in the board meeting.
Certainly. And Jeremy, what I would suggest is if you could send me an email.
Yep, we'll do.
Just because it's the easiest way for me to keep track of things.
Yep, and that makes sense. So.
And I do know that we've the biggest expense there is legal.
Okay.
So
I think if I'm assuming once you can go in these codes, you click it and then it gives you very itemized, like ESD is expenditures here, legal outside counsels here, investigations here, whatever, right? So
yeah, I can get you much more information on that. Yep.
Thank you.
So what I did is I tried to look at what we spent last year, and I know we have put in place things as processes, so we won't spend as much as we did, but I just wanted to make sure that that right now I'm not underestimating where I think we might end. So the second way to look at this is by object. So I will go to the object page. And this looks at what do we budget for salaries, associated payroll costs, purchase services, supplies and materials, capital outlay, which is kind of ridiculous, but that's another story. Other objects, and just so that you know what other objects are, is mostly our liability insurance. is there. That's the biggest expense that's in that bucket. And then transfers and contingency, of which the contingency is the largest amount, and we only have about $31,000 worth of transfers there. So the rest of it is contingency. As you can see, through September, we had spent 7.2 million on those, of which, again, the bulk is in salaries and associated payroll costs. Again, if we weren't close to what our prior year expenditure amount was, I forced that a little bit. Purchase services, we spent a lot more in purchase services last year than, as you can see, than we budgeted for. We budgeted for 6.9, just shy of $7 million, and we spent just shy of $11 million. I do not believe we will be anywhere close to that overage. So I only put in that we would spend a little bit more than what we actually budgeted.
So
But
services would include things like utilities, our contracted transportation service.
yes,
It is also legal services, auditing services, all those kinds of services, professional services.
right. The biggest expenditure there, though, just so that you have was by one department was the sped services to the tune of 2 million over budget. So we have gotten a real handle on that. They can only go out for a contract if we cannot hire within, and if we're not hiring within, that we put a hold on that position so that we can't double up, which is what happened frequently last year. Especially in the ed aid category.
And then that's part of the position controls that you guys have put in place.
Yes.
Thank you.
Just a question to that, because I have a student who does receive sped services, and we received a mail earlier this week regarding loss of employee associated or something around that. Do those controls then slow down the process to hire those individuals to provide those services then?
No, what really slows down the process, I would say, is that it's especially for the more specialized services for SLPs, so speech language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, psych services. I'm missing one. Those are very difficult to get, especially mid-year, if somebody goes on a leave or someone just quits and goes somewhere else. Then we have to go through a contracted service to get someone. And like just for instance, this week we had someone lined up, but didn't move. I mean, we moved as fast as we could, but they already had another position that they took. So we're back to getting that, having to fill that position. And sometimes we have to fill them virtually, which is really not the way we would like to do it. But if that's the only way we can get someone, that's what we do. I will say that's special education services are the hardest positions to fill.
Sure. So last year it was really more in line where we had duplicative specialists who were kind of sitting over the top. We maybe oversourced for that. Would you say that was a primary reason why?
Yes, last year we were definitely, yeah. And this year, because we put more safeguards in place so that wouldn't happen. Principals can't just call the contract agency and say, hey, I need somebody else. I need another person. It all has to go through. not just through SPED, but before anything can happen, it has to come to me and to Dave.
Great, thank you.
Mhm. So this is just another way of looking at it, and how I've projected it out. And as we go through each of the months, obviously we'll have more of the actuals, and we'll be able to tweak whether we think the projection is going to change either up or down in each of the categories. And even though I'll go to the appropriations page. We haven't had any resolutions. We will, because we will need to move budget around. But this shows where we are. We're obviously at the beginning of the year, we're completely fine within all of our appropriation levels. And I don't see anything that seems to be creeping too fast one direction or the other. So you will notice that through
Gail, I don't think this one got printed out for us. Can you
Oh,
zoom
okay.
in? Can you either zoom in
sure.
if you're
I can do
talking anything specific, zoom in and like highlight the cell that you want to talk about.
Okay, here we go. So when I talked about the resolutions, this is the column where we will add if we've taken a resolution to the board for appropriation transfer supplemental budget to move, let's say, from instruction into support services, or from contingency into one or any of the other categories. And then as I look at where we are year to date as of the September 30 date, I don't see anything that would say, oh boy, we're really going to be out of appropriation yet. We need to think about doing a resolution. I just know that we don't have enough. It's like in their special revenue funds, I know that we have not budgeted enough there. And so we'll have to bump each of the areas up. But so far, as you can see, and this will go to the board every month so that you can see that we're within our appropriation levels. Or if it's creeping up and we need to make a transfer. And then the last item
So the only one, I do see one that has a negative under facilities.
Facilities. Oh. That's because of encumbrances. And I think
Talking about the over under budget on the column M, is that where you're seeing, Claire?
Yeah, you're right, Claire. Thank you.
So is that your capital projects fund for
that's
the bond?
capital projects. Yep.
Yeah.
And I
So
believe the biggest reason is because beginning fund balance probably was not.
So maybe at our next meeting, we can just
Yeah.
hear more about that.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. And then I do have a tab for the state school fund, but there hasn't been a lot of activity again. So if you want me to show it, I can show you. It's going to look really wonky on the year to date and final because there's.
I think we just reviewed that this last meeting, and I don't think we've had an estimate since then. So
No,
I don't
we
know
haven't.
that we don't need to go over that again. I don't think.
Yeah, 620 was the last one. Okay, so that is last year and current year. And if there are any other questions about that, I'm happy to answer them.
There's just a couple more items on the agenda.
Mhm.
And I don't know, do you have a copy of the agenda there?
We did add two very small items at the end, but they're minor.
So I did not include a copy of the sample resolution, but I would recommend to the board that we would impose a resolution or adopt a resolution that says that we will go with whatever, basically it's whatever the state comes out as. So for years beginning after a certain date, the tax rate stated in this resolution shall be adjusted for changes in construction costs, and the Oregon Department of Revenue will determine the adjusted rate limitations and report to the district. So that means that we can let the county assessors know that we are using whatever the state rate is, and the state comes out with those every year, and they publish them usually a year in advance, so that you can see what the next year is going to be. So that will be my recommendation to the board on the construction excise tax.
I have a question just a higher level. So, and I was watching the commissioner debates or city council thing here in Newburgh. And somebody mentioned, oh, we cut the excise tax at the city council level. Is this different, or two different CEPs?
Yeah, this is different. This is specifically for school districts.
Okay.
Construction excise tax, and it's for new construction
Right.
of homes. So the idea is there's a tax on a new home. It's a dollar something per square foot as you're
Sure.
building that home, and then that comes to the school district so that it helps the school district provide the infrastructure for all the new homes. So it's important to update that rate to the state rate so that it's kind of like the inflationary rate that needs to happen over time.
Yep.
And that way, as we have more homes being built here, then those funds come in and help us keep our schools, like if we have to add, well, right now we don't have to add classrooms, but if enrollment were increasing because of a lot of homes coming in, we would have those funds to help support having infrastructure in place to support our students.
Yeah, thank you. I just didn't realize the city could have their own, and then we had our own.
This is specifically for school districts.
Okay,
yeah.
So the last thing that I wanted to talk about is the sale of the old Dundee property and the debt payment that we currently have on the property. And we have a year and a half left on the loan. It is due June of 26. And I talked with our banker to see if there was a way for us to get an extension. And she said yes, but highly advised against doing it right now. The reason being, we were just downgraded, and we are, everyone knows the financial position we're in. And she said, if we wait until we're closer, if we think we need another 6 months, a year from now, that would be the time to go out and do that. But we have a little over 18 months, 19 months at this point, until that debt is due. And so kind of bide our time, see if if we need to do any zoning changes for future buyer, if that comes up. If we know that then it's going to take more time, then at that point we would want to go out, but not until then.
Thank you. Did they give any instance of
Sorry.
like what type of modification? I mean, it would be like another 6 months extension, year. I mean, like I mean, did she or your person give like, here's maybe some options that we would have to think about or could think about if we had to do it?
If we have to, I mean, like what we were, when I was talking to her, what had been asked of me was to see, could we extend for like 6 months?
Right.
And that was, she said, yes, that would probably work at that time, but not to do it before.
Right.
So that we're
Okay.
in a better position. But that was really, she said there may be other options at that point too. We
Sure.
don't, the market could have changed. Things could be very different in a year.
Okay.
So that was her suggestion.
Okay.
Galen, do you have an estimated value, like maybe a yield compared to the debt service that has to happen on that? So a potential revenue versus, I mean, what the payoff is? Is there going to be a net positive?
Well, it's the selling of the property.
Right.
So whatever we can get currently, what the property is worth is, depending upon what it's used for, should be enough to cover any of the debt service and a little more.
Okay.
If we use it for certain other purposes, it could be substantially more, but we don't know yet.
Sure. And I don't mean to get in the details there, but can you share what the debt is that we're talking
That is
about?
about 3.5.
I think it's 347, I think.
Yeah, it's just under 3.5.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'm not going to try to let the cat out of the bag, but I believe we'll have an update next meeting a little bit about this. That's all I'm going to say at this point.
Yeah.
You're talking about the next board meeting?
Next board meeting.
Thank you.
Yes, my apologies. Maybe not me. Yeah, we'll leave it as that. But thank you for explaining that. So the last item that was originally on the agenda, there's two more that I added for the people that came in late. Is anybody up for taking minutes? If so, I'd love some help on that. But you don't have to. I can, as you can see, I do a good enough job. If I have to, I can go back and listen to the meeting. If anybody's willing to help with the minutes,
I'm
I'll take
happy to help with minutes in a future meeting when I
Yes,
know that I
yes.
need to take them.
Yeah, no, this is not today because I have been taking my own high level minutes already. So we probably should put that at the very beginning, but we learn as we go. So, and then the other thing that I added and we talked about at the very beginning of the meeting is really kind of an open. It's like, is there anything the group feels we still need? I know we've between Claire, Michelle, and Gail, and we have had a great amount of learnings over the last two meetings. I know that even Claire on one of my lists here, we still even have a few, like, see how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 potential items to talk about in the future meetings. Anywhere from audits to bonds to budget blocks to different items. So I just wanted to allow us, now that we've had like two good solid meetings of learnings and education, is there things that we're still looking that maybe this committee needs? So
I don't know if now's the time or not, but Galen, I was curious if there was any update on your recommendation about a forensic audit and where we're at with that. And
I do know that Dave is looking, is trying to contact a few different people on that. We talked about it today to see if we can get it moved forward. But it's just finding someone is really where we are.
okay, and I just feel like at a prior, I believe it was a board meeting, we had talked about maybe not needing to do that. And so
yeah, it's more of a I mean, after the stuff that we've looked at through the audit process this year, because we've done a real deep dive into all of our liabilities, into just a lot of areas, and I think that would help anyone who comes in to take a look, because many of the accounts had not been reconciled in quite some time. So I think just that alone has been a real.
So the district hired two experts, school finance experts, Galen being one of them, and then Andre Shellhaus is doing the audit work or the audit prep work. And they're the ones that have reconciled all the accounts, and they are highly skilled individuals that gave decades of service to K-12 Oregon districts. And I believe that this is just Claire in her own opinion, but it's an educated opinion. I'll say that you've had some of the top-notch experts already review the books and get them in good order. Okay, you started with Jackie Olson with OASBO, getting us through the budget process. And then you continued with Galen and Andre. And so having, I believe that the forensic audit is not as necessary. This is Claire speaking. This is not the superintendent. I mean, the superintendent needs to, have that conversation with the board. But from a financial expertise that I carry from my experience, I feel like we've already done the cleanup. We're viewing, they're bringing us information. We're going to continue to monitor this year. So we're putting in some good safeguards so we don't have similar circumstances that happened last year. So I think, the forensic could get us down to where we're looking at the gnat's eyebrow, right, of what happened. But I'm not sure if that's going to help us as much as making sure we're doing it right now and that we have good practices in our best practices in place and functional and good oversight being provided by the board, by the audit committee, by the budget committee. I think might be more valuable. Again, this is just Claire Hertz's opinion.
This is Michelle Morrison's opinion. I'm going to echo Claire on that. When you say the word forensic, to me, that implies that there's a criminal, something happening, money's missing. And as long as we are reconciling to cash, that seems excessive in this circumstance. We can see several areas where the estimates didn't provide what the actuals needed. And I think that's, again, the oversight that we're looking for. But I would just echo Claire's recommendation there, but it's completely up to the board. You guys need to be able to get right with the community as well. In terms of potential topics for this group, I'm curious, maybe a little bit of education on PERS. We have I think some changes coming in the biennium that probably need to be front and center as we're looking at the budget for 25-26. And then maybe just a high level overview of the grant programs that we have, those special revenue funds and how they interplay and work with the general fund to meet the goals in the strategic plan.
I think Claire has that on this list. Supplemental budget needed for grants. Is that what you would categorize that as? Okay, and then her review benefit rates, PERS bonds. Would that be also covering? Okay. But this is good. At least we have it. Just making sure.
We both do the same thing for a living, right? So.
I would like to concur with what Claire and Michelle have said, but say it from a different standpoint, and that is from a board's credibility with the constituents, the work you're doing to create this committee, to have two board members fully involved in understanding and tracking how we go forward, you'd be much better off, in my opinion, in putting your efforts into trying to hire the best person to take the baton from the work that's been done that Claire just talked about, rather than trying to go back and doing some kind of forensic audit that might, point a finger at one person making a mistake, when in fact it may have been multiple people making multiple kinds of judgment errors.
Well, I appreciate that. I guess I'll point back to you, Galen. From now, you've been elbows deep in this. You don't see any red flags that we would need to move forward with the forensic audit. Again, this is opinion.
Right.
Just,
Andrew and I have talked about it several times, actually, even just this week. Like Michelle said, there's no indication of cash going anywhere, of any fraud happening,
Okay.
right? Anything. What was happening was no controls over hiring, whether it was hiring for people that we owned or whether it was contracting out. there was very little control there. We had people signing, signing contracts and doing things, and now everything, I've put the fear of God in everyone. They don't sign anything. I got something today that was like, oh no, this one's okay. This isn't for money. It's not, you can actually sign this one little thing. But I think that those things were the things that were happening that were a lack of control. And as I said earlier, accounts were not being reconciled on a regular basis. And I think just our work with the auditors this year has, just today, they said, we've never had all of these schedules prepared in advance for us. But the reason they was because we'd gone through and done all of that reconciliation beforehand. So they didn't have to do it. We had property taxes together. We had all of the other pieces ready for them. So I would agree that the money would be, instead of spending it on an audit, would be to get somebody in this position, long term to really support the district.
Appreciate the opinions.
Also, the one thing that I see or I hear is the community still doesn't understand what happened. And so I agree, no forensic audit. I don't think it's necessary, but I do think some kind of a report to highlight the findings that Galen has found and what has been done to prevent it from happening in the future, that gets released to the public so that they understand what happened, because that question is still out there.
Yeah, I think that would be really great for our community. I think that it comes down to how do we put that together in a way that people understand, rather than giving them information that is what it is, but can't necessarily be grasped by a regular person who doesn't go through the details of a budget or see those kind of minutia. So I don't know if that's something that this committee would take on, as it is the financial. Yeah,
I would say probably the introduction or executive summary for
Yeah.
the report would just open with, due to their not being necessary forensic audit because
Yeah.
these things are in place. The cash is all accounted for. There hasn't been any criminal activity or fraud, just like Galen's shared, and then move into the testing and monitoring that's going to happen going forward.
And I think if we can be as transparent about it moving forward. So one thing, it's like there's an expectation that this year is going to be hard. And so like next year is going to be, but then we have all the furlough days that now we have to, make up for. So like helping to like guide the community through that, I think would be really helpful. And I think by being very explicit about the steps or about providing the information, I think will help, especially with a lot of the back and forth that goes on in this community. By saying, again, when you hear forensic audit, like you said, you're thinking of malfeasance or someone's pocketing money. Obviously not the case here, but just going through and saying, here are the top 5 items that drove, the majority of the issues here, the under budgeting of, and then over budgeting of tax dollars from the community and how that works. Obviously, if you start talking about ADMWs and calculate like that's, but if you just say like, here's $1.5 million here, here's $1.5 million here, and just say this doesn't make up for the entire amount because there's a lot of the budget and the school year is a moving organism, but we at least wanted to address some of the challenges within the community and draw everyone's attention to it. I think the more transparency we can bring to it, the better. I think it will lay a foundation of making the community asking the right questions. It doesn't go like, obviously, over the last, I would say 8 years, it's been quite a challenge here. where intentions are, people are assuming the worst intentions of people as opposed to the best intentions. So if we could just bring attention to the key issues, again, I don't think we need to relitigate what happened per se, but just say, here's how we ended up here, and here's how we're going to move forward. And oh, by the way, next year, we're going to continue to have challenges, as it relates to low student enrollment and wanting to not have to furlough day ever, like all the time. And then so just again, continuing that conversation through the year as opposed to submitting a report and then June comes around and then everyone's freaking out. Like if we can continue the conversation month by month and add to that, whether through our communication arm, or I think, like you said, adding an executive summary to what we're talking about here and having this group be responsible to write it as part of the community and not as elected officials, I think would be really helpful to hopefully start to heal some of those wounds.
Appreciate that. Any other thoughts before I give my kind of thought on this? No. Well, I love everybody's feedback. I appreciate it. I would agree. And I think part of the delay on bringing everybody on board is there's so much good skill sets in this group that we wanted to extend that from 3 to 6 community members. So I would actually suggest this is there anybody or maybe a couple, 2, 3 of you that maybe want to maybe tackle this? November is a month where we will have 2 board meetings. Am I correct on that, Director Allen? I thought Dave told me there's 2. I cannot remember right now. We can validate real fast, but not saying that we do next week's board meeting, but does anybody want to take a stab at that and creating that maybe for the one that supposedly, no, there's only one board meeting this month, probably because of the holiday.
I wouldn't rush the process. I think you should give enough time to do a good job. And so
Yeah,
if
I'm
you're
not trying to rush it. I thought I was going to say it wasn't meant for next week's meeting. I was going to say if it was going to be a later one, but at this point, I just verified at least the calendar I have that we will not have one until December. Like I didn't know if somebody wanted to start at least tackling it. We don't have to share it. We can get, do a draft and we can then bring it back to.
I also think it's important to know what's coming out of the financial audit, to kind of dovetail the report to include that, because I wouldn't want to create something that was separate from what they're going to already be bringing forward.
And if you get notice that you're going to have a clear audit, that's always good news to share. So it could be a part of that. I actually think it should be done in relation to that clearer picture somewhere at the end of January, as we begin to build towards the clearer picture for what the 25-26 budget will be like. We can put those 2 things together in terms of a message to the community that in the 6 months from the time in which, it was discovered in May, 8 months, I guess, until that point, all this good work has happened. And we now have confidence as we go forward with a good audit that here's what we can project for the following year. I mean, in terms of confidence for the community. For you folks as a board member.
Yeah, I don't disagree that that's not something that we want to rush out. I do think that generally with things like this, with people who have a deep knowledge, it can be difficult to say things in a way that we're trying to get people to understand on a more base level, which is, I think, one reason why if we have certain piece of information, even just understanding a certain kind of messaging that we would want to lay out once we have other pieces of information. I don't think it's a terrible idea to start thinking about it now without having a plan to get it out necessarily in December or any meeting. But I think about like a ballot measure. It seems simple until everyone's reading it and everybody doesn't know if they're voting yes or no for what they actually want on this. I think that there's certain things that are more complicated to explain to the general population than we sometimes give it credit for. So I would encourage, even if it's just we come back with ideas on how we might lay that out going forward. I don't think it's too early to start thinking about how messaging that would be most effective without getting it out.
And I agree with everybody. I would add on what Director Allen's saying is there's a little conflict here of waiting until January, February to do this. Is if we need to tell our superintendent now to stop a forensic audit. And he's going out to he's doing RFPs right now. He's looking at people to do stuff. And so, and if we're going to say we suggest to stop that and apply it to finding the better CFO by maybe giving him a little extra money or whatever that resource is there, if we're going to say move it from one to the other, I think we need to do that sooner than later. And so I don't think we can, and I think going back to Derek's suggestion is like, this is an ongoing communication. So I'm not saying that we do one grandioso presentation. I'm just saying, what have we learned now? Maybe we can start putting that together and then we can move, we can always add on to that. We can give updates, we can do whatever. My ask was just, we have a lot of skill set in this room. Does somebody want to maybe take a stab at it and go forward? So if not, I know I've done plenty of presentations from a corporate level. I just bet, I'm wearing lots of hats too. So
Well, I think we should have more than one. I think maybe like 3 people working together on
that's
it.
fine. Yeah.
And so and I don't mind being one of the 3, but or however many want to volunteer. But I think it's important to have someone that's not an Oregon K-12 school finance expert help write it, right? Because I don't want to use jargon. Right. I am used to writing to the community, but I also think it's also good to have that a different lens, if you will. I think that you've brought some good thinking forward. I don't know if that's, I mean, I don't want to tap people on the shoulder. I want to make people.
I would volunteer to be one of the 3 to help.
Yeah.
I mean, to look at it and help write it.
You press the button.
Oh, you need.
I would be help.
Do we have any other parents of students here?
Button.
My voice projects usually pretty well. Do we have any other parents of students?
I'm a parent of a student.
Okay, because I think that might be a good avenue as well. As one of us who have children in the district who have a vested interest, not only as a community member, but as a parent, I think one of us probably would be a good individual that
We could have 4.
Yeah. Okay.
I am definitely willing to review and recommend changes. As far as first draft, I'll let others.
I will step
more
up and be the
capable.
3rd member and you can be the editor.
Okay,
How about that?
that works for me.
All right. I might have to bounce some ideas off my wife. She's usually the writer in the family. I do all the operation stuff.
Well, we can get some graphics from you too, right? So
Can get some graphics from me? Yeah, you visuals. Yeah. I can do the
there you
visuals.
go.
Infographs, right?
Yeah. I can do that stuff.
So a quick question. You're concerned about that the superintendent is going out and looking for a forensic auditor. I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong in my assumption, that both of you are, one or both of you are presenting the activities of the finance committee to the board at the board meetings.
That is the plan. I know there is already agenda items for Galen to present financial stuff. I did not see a financial committee update per se.
Okay.
So I was going to write back and say, I think we need a spot. I already said this verbally in our last board meeting that we need to have just ongoing placeholder, right? So that is my intention of one of us to give an update. Yes.
Would it be a benefit next week for you to say that this recommendation was verbally made in our meeting and our committee members are working on a written recommendation to not do the forensic audit?
Yeah, not wait till
So-
it's actually done, but say, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's our place to make a recommendation. That's why I made it my personal my professional opinion.
Okay.
I don't know that's within the charge of what the board has asked us to do. I think the two board members though could share the conversation that we've had here tonight with the superintendent, so that he's here, hearing from his financial experts from the community that have come together to support the district. And then also mention that we're working on a report to help summarize and bring clarity that can be shared in the community as a possible alternative to a forensic audit. But so I don't want us, I mean, I don't want to be, really, it's up to the board and the superintendent, I believe, to make that decision, and
Sure.
and that we can offer an alternative that would be supportive of what the community is asking for.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important to go to the board and basically get that approval and get that all stuff before we start doing all this work, and they're going to say, hey, we don't care. So to sit there and say, we're going to go this, propose that we go down this route instead of the forensic audit and get all that approved now. I mean, I think that's the idea why of talking to them, whether it's our charter or not. I mean, I think that's at least got to be the recommendation has to be made to somebody who can actually approve that, because otherwise we're going down this route on our own and they're still going down their route.
Yeah, I apologize for setting off a bit of a firestorm with asking the original question. Yeah, it wasn't my intent to have us make that decision. And then it got kind of caught up in this idea of a correspondence. Mostly, I feel like that is to explain to the community where we are at based on where we found out we were in May. Because that's what we're here for, to do that, and then going forward, make sure that we're on the same page. So I don't want to make it part of this committee to make decisions on part of the board. Really, I expect that Gail and talking to the board about if I was to ask this question at a board meeting, that would be a lot more clear for everyone on whether we should or shouldn't, and helping the actual board make the decision. So I apologize for getting a couple of things piled up there. But I do really appreciate all of the input and thoughts. That's why I did ask it, to try to get a better grasp on it.
I think the board did do an action from Dr. Radich's request to authorize one, but it's probably the superintendent. We have a long-term interim now to have that conversation with the board. You gave us this action item, and here's what's transpired since then. And I think you're reporting to the superintendent to help him understand what the conversation was here tonight, but then for him to come back to the board and just talk about where he is as a superintendent and where the board is in whether to move forward or not.
Yeah, we did have an action item to do that. I believe at our last board meeting, it got brought up that we potentially won't be doing that, which is kind of why I got to where the reason I asked, because after we go through this information, it would seem like we'd have a much better idea where we're at.
Okay, well, so it sounds like we have a few items to bring up in the future discussions for meetings. The main thing out of this, though, is sounds like there's a few of you that will maybe work on building a document that we will communicate to the community about kind of where we're at and where our future is going and what we want to focus on, et cetera. I think we're all willing to review it too when it gets to a point where we can review it. So not all editing goes to Jerry, but if you want to take first half, great. So is there any other open items before we get to pretty much our last one, which is next meeting? So
when is the next board meeting?
well, the next board meeting is next week.
Okay. Would it make sense for someone to come and provide public comment on behalf of the financial, like, I guess not on behalf of the financial committee, but to express, I mean, this is all public. Yeah, it's all public comment for someone to come and kind of express some of the sentiments of this group is, as we as a community are looking to heal and move forward, um, the idea of a forensic audit provides us a look back that we were like, we're full, like, again, this is why my wife crossed my words when I when I talk,
I
but
get it.
we're taking a direction of looking forward as opposed to looking back, and the forensic audit, I think, holds us back from doing that. If someone needs to come and talk for 2 minutes, I can do that as well, if we don't have time or it's not allocated on the actual agenda.
Well, I was gonna say, I'm gonna get it on the agenda for us to make an update. Unless Director Allen feels differently, I would say at that time, if somebody that's more like for you or anybody else on the committee that wants to come up and sit with us and give some input or feedback about how the committee is going, that does not have to be contained to the public comment of the 3 minutes. You can be part of that discussion. And I would invite anybody to come up if you want to be part of that meeting next week. So.
I was just going to say, I would never discourage somebody from making public comment if they felt inclined to do so. In terms of the financial audit, I just don't know that it's a big enough item on our next agenda that this is something that is a worry that it will happen if we don't step in right now. I just, again, I knew that it is something that we were talking about not doing anymore after we talked about doing it. I thought this was a good time, but I do not think that it is a pivotal moment in the decision whether we will or won't at the next meeting. So again, public comment is always appreciated. If we could have somebody come up and talk in general about what we have also talked about today, but I don't think that this is a giant issue in the moment.
I'll just back to you, Galen. You're saying, and I'll point this question to you. You're saying, as far as your knowledge, Dave is looking at people now, correct? We still have, as a board, we still have the final approval, so we could say no at the very last minute. But
Sure.
I don't want him. What I'm trying to do is, he's a new superintendent. He's got lots of stuff on his plate. If we can check one thing off to not have to do anymore, then let's communicate that earlier than later.
Yeah.
But you were saying he's already in the middle of reaching out to folks, right?
I gave him numbers today for some people. So that's all I know is that he asked for some numbers, and so I gave them to him.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Well, on that topic, I think I'll communicate with Dave via email and include Saul and just give an update, and we'll go from there. I still will ask to be on the agenda as a financial committee updates of what we've done in the last 2 meetings since the last board meeting. And if you want to join, let me know, and I can have you come up and give your community view as well. So with that, let's move to the next meeting for us. I know we're getting into holiday season. Sounds like we also talked about maybe.
We talked about early February.
Right.
Like, I think we have a cadence after, like, it's before a board meeting.
Yeah,
but
I still have that colorful.
Yeah,
I tried to do earlier,
if we did that for February, then we could, that would give us ample time to have the audit completed, to have the enrollment, the ADMW update, have some more information that will help guide the budget process. So be early enough to help guide the budget process. So I think that's the right timing.
So if we keep it on a Wednesday, and it'll be the week ahead, that would be February 5th on a Wednesday night.
That works for me.
And local, the property taxes, we should have a much better handle on that at that point as well, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, then let's just, do we want to talk about any future ones after that, or just say that's our next one, and we know our kind of agenda items we want to review?
At that point, we'll be running into the budget committee, so
Okay.
we might want to meet less while the
Right.
budget committee is doing its work.
And we may also by that point have an update on a new or a permanent CFO position
We
as well.
can certainly hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. Sounds good. So next meeting at this point is February 5th, Wednesday. Normal time, normal place. Anything last minute for anybody? Okay, I will call the meeting to adjournment at